I will go over a little bit of the long history of the Ballet mecanique, and then I'm going to concentrate on the more modern aspects of it, the work that I've been doing since I produced the premiere in 1999. In 1924, a young composer from Trenton, New Jersey, who was living in Paris, decided to write the world's most outrageous piece of music. And this outrageous piece of music was called the Ballet mecanique. And it called for 3 xylophones, 7 electric bells, 3 airplane propellers, a tam-tam, 4 bass drums, a siren, 2 pianos, and 16 player pianos playing 4 different parts. And there was a bit of a problem with that, is that it was impossible at the time to synchronize multiple player pianos. Antheil didn't quite know this because the piano manufacturer he was working with, Pleyel, in Paris, had patented a device for synchronizing multiple player pianos, which they never built and probably would not have worked had they actually built it. So instead, Antheil premiered the piece with a single player piano and the rest of the ensemble in Paris at the Théâtre Champs-Élysées in June of 1925. And this is what happened. Come on, you want to play?
We played it in Paris and had great success with it there. The critiques of the concert appeared on the front pages of Parisian newspapers instead of in the back pages, mostly because there were riots and people punched one another. And the surrealists who were violently on my side at the Champs-Élysées came in and punched everyone who didn't like the music.
So as one critic said, everyone knew they had been somewhere. This was considered a huge artistic success in Paris at the time, on a scale with Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which had been premiered 12 years earlier, which also caused riots, and which was also considered eventually a great artistic success. So Antheil became the toast of Paris and the toast of Europe, and was the most famous American musician in Europe for a time. 2 years later, he was invited to present the piece at Carnegie Hall. No, that's wrong. Okay, let's go this way. Come on. He was invited to present the piece at Carnegie Hall in New York by a promoter in New York who didn't really know what he was doing. And the piece was kind of a disaster. Among other things, the electric fans, which were used for the propeller sounds, were pointed directly at the audience. And the resulting slew of programs, toupees, and other flyable paraphernalia sort of overwhelmed the audience. And as this cartoon in the Herald Tribune said, the nerviest opened umbrellas as a protection against the snow of paper. And it was really one of the most famous disasters in musical history. This was a cartoon that ran in another paper, the New York World, the next day, making fun of Antheil's work. And in fact, Dr. Seuss, I don't have this, but Dr. Seuss did a cartoon about an automatic timpani player, which I discovered very recently, which was definitely taken from the New York experience of Antheil's. He disappeared. This was such a colossal failure that he went back to Paris with his tail between his legs and was basically not heard from again for a long time. He continued to write music, and he actually wrote an opera which had its premiere in Germany just before the Nazis took over, and so that opera was never heard from again. And he eventually ended up in Hollywood, where he became a film composer, and he worked with some very famous film directors. This was his first big hit, The Plainsman with Gary Cooper, and after he did this, he worked in Hollywood for about 12 years. Actually, it was more than that. It was more like 20 years. And this was another one of his famous scores, was The Pride and the Passion, which was about the Spanish Revolution against Napoleon, with Cary Grant, Sophia Loren, Frank Sinatra, and Theodore Bickel. It was directed by Stanley Kramer. It was a very, very big picture. He worked with Cecil B. DeMille, and he worked with Darryl Zanuck, and he worked with a lot of great big Hollywood names. One of the people he worked with was this person. This is Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was considered by many the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was a big film star in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. She had emigrated from Austria. She had originally been married to a German war manufacturer, weapons manufacturer, and she escaped from him and came to America and devoted much of her life after that to fighting the German war effort, and was a very public anti-Nazi. She sold kisses for the war effort. But Hedy Lamarr was also a inventor, and she was a brilliant woman with a real knack for inventing gadgets. And she and Antheil collaborated on a system which they called the secret communication system. And the secret communication system was a system for preventing Nazi submarines from jamming Allied torpedoes. And it worked by synchronizing a transmitter in a ship and a receiver in a torpedo so that the torpedo's radio instructions kept shifting frequency, so that the German submarines monitoring the torpedo guidance systems couldn't figure out what was going on because the frequencies kept shifting. This also became known as spread spectrum. It became known as frequency hopping, and today it is used in Wi-Fi, it is used in Bluetooth, it is used in all sorts of wireless communications. They offered it to the US Navy. This is 1941. They offered it to the US Navy, and the US Navy said, oh, but we're not interested in putting player pianos into submarines. So it was turned down, and it ended up being used for the first time by the military in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where it was used to communicate with the US fleet, which was blockading Cuba, so that the Russians couldn't find out what the orders were to the US fleet. And now, of course, it's all over the place. They patented it. They never collected a dime on the patent because the patent expired long before they found a use for it. Hedy Lamarr died in 1999. She was awarded a Medal of Freedom by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, to which she replied, "It's about time." So the Ballet mecanique sat there for close to 75 years, and it was performed a little bit here, a little bit there, but nobody really took it on until Schirmer got in touch with me in 1998 and said, I think we have the technology to do this now, will you help us? And the technology to do it was a MIDI-controlled player piano known as the Yamaha Disclavir. And this is one of 3 companies that make MIDI-controlled player pianos. MIDI is a communications protocol that was invented in the early 1980s for communicating between musical instruments and computers. And Schirmer came up with this idea of synchronizing 16 MIDI player pianos using a computer. And it was a completely feasible way of doing this, and they contacted me and they said, would you like to do the programming to make this happen? And I said, yes, I think I would like to. I was teaching at UMass Lowell at the time, and we managed to convince Yamaha to loan us 16 Disclavirs to produce the first concert of the piece. So we did a premiere of the piece in November of 1999, and one of the 2 piano parts was handled by Professor McDonald, who then suckered me into who then persuaded me to come to Tufts. We had a tremendous success with the performance. It was sold out. We made a recording of it. This is a picture of the MIDI sequence that we used to control one piano. This is a few measures of the score, done in a program called Studio Vision, which unfortunately no longer exists. But because of the way that MIDI is structured, we could save this as a standard MIDI file, which could then be used by other programs. And since then, It's been used in Logic, it's been used in Digital Performer, it's been used in Pro Tools, it's been used in Max, the same files that I created back in 1999. So we did the premiere and it looked a little bit like this. That's John on the right at the piano.
Yeah.
And it still looks the same. And the student ensemble really outdid themselves. It was a terrific performance. The conductor was Jeff Fisher, who is still at UMass Lowell, the head of the percussion department there. Shortly after we did this performance, I was contacted by a film archivist who told me that there was a film, which I had sort of vaguely known about, called Ballet Mecanique, which had been created by the French artist Fernand Léger and an American who actually grew up in Winchester, Massachusetts, by the name of Dudley Murphy, who was a cinematographer. And the film, Ballet Mecanique, was supposed to be done with the music of Ballet Mecanique. And it was announced that this was going to be a collaboration between Léger and Murphy and Antheil. Also, Man Ray was involved with it to a certain extent, although he denied his involvement later on. And Ezra Pound was involved in it to a certain extent. After they announced it, the collaborators never spoke to each other again. And so the movie and the music never went together, and when they were finally finished, the music was approximately twice as long as the movie. So this film archivist got in touch with me and said, we've discovered a virgin print of the movie in the archives of a organization called Anthology Film Archives, and we would like to take your score and put it to the movie. And I said, well, you can't do that because the score's too long. And he said, edit it. And I said, well, I would need permission to do that. So I got in touch with Shermer, and I got in touch with the executor of the Antheil estate, who's a composer in San Francisco, named Charles Amerkanian. And I said, can I do this? And they said, sure, go ahead. So I edited the piece and also made a recording of it, which was much faster than the recording that was done in Lowell. And the way I was able to do that was I midified all of the instruments, and we had midis of the bass drums and of the xylophones and of the tam-tam and of the live pianos, and I was able to perform it at a much faster speed. That way I was able to match it to the film. The film premiered at the Whitney Museum in New York, and then was showed at about 150 locations around the world, and ended up on a DVD set called Unseen Cinema. A few years later, I'll show you the movie. few years later, I got a small grant from Tufts to start a documentary film about Ballet mecanique, which I did with Howard Wolf, and we did a small film. And then I got a much larger grant from the New York Community Chest, and I worked with a director in LA by the name of Ron Frank, and we came out with a feature-length film called Bad Boy Made Good, the revival of George Antheil's 1924 Ballet mecanique, and this was featured on PBS in 2004, and was on a DVD and was available and is now available on Amazon as a Prime Video stream, for which I get $1 every time. Very lucrative career choice. In 2006, I was approached by the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which is a huge museum. It's in 2 buildings next to the Capitol Mall, and this is the newer building. It was designed by I.M. Pei, and inside it has a gigantic atrium, which is 4 stories high, completely surrounded by glass, and they were putting on an exhibit of Dada. And if you don't know what Dada is anti-art. The first piece of Dada art, Dada sculpture, was a urinal which had the label on it, fountain. Mm-hmm. That Dada was a movement that said that anything you want can be art, we don't care. And it took root in France, in Germany, and to a certain extent in the United States. That the National Gallery, in conjunction with the with the Museum of Modern Art and the Centre Pompidou in Paris, was putting on this gigantic exhibit of Dadaist art. And the National Gallery wanted a musical accompaniment to this exhibit, and they wanted to do something with Ballet mecanique. And they called me up and they said, can we put on a performance of Ballet mecanique? I said, sure, but it's expensive. You need 16-player pianos and 12 percussionists, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, well, can you figure out a way that we can do many performances of it without spending that kind of money? As it happens, the year before, I had been at a conference called New Interfaces for Musical Expression in Vancouver, Canada, and I met a guy by the name of Eric Singer who built musical robots. And I contacted Eric and I said, would you like to build a installation for the National Gallery of Art of robots that play the Ballet mecanique? And he said, how much time do we have? I said, 3 months. And he said, that's not enough time. I said, well, let's do it anyway. And he agreed, and we built a robotic installation for the National Gallery of Art, which was scheduled to run 17 days, and instead it ran 9 weeks. It was named by the Washington Post as the most fun of any lunch hour in Washington, D.C. It was shown twice a day without any warning. A museum employee went up to a computer which was hiding behind a pillar and hit the space bar, and the thing just took off. This is what it looked like in the atrium. We had 16 baby grand player pianos. These were not provided by Yamaha. Yamaha had a change in executive directorship and decided not to support this. Big mistake. Instead, we were supported by a company called QRS Music that makes player pianos under a variety of names. These were all Gil Branson player pianos. And they were grand pianos, which was kind of amazing because we hadn't done it with grand pianos before. And as I said, it ran for several weeks, and it was seen by over 100,000 people in Washington. It was featured on NPR, it was featured on ABC television, and it was a huge amount of fun. etc. We cut the piece down to 12 minutes because we figured that was about all that the audience could take. And we left in, there are great silences at the end of the piece, where Antheil wrote in these silences, one of which lasts as long as 30 seconds, in which nothing happens. As he described it, it was time moving without touching it. And we left those in, and for the National Gallery installation, because we wanted to hear the reverb time in the hall, which was about 6 seconds, which, if you know anything about acoustics, is ridiculously long. So that was one of the highlights, was the silences. The audience didn't know what to do, and this thing was ringing around the hall, and it was a great moment. Then this guy comes into the picture. Guy Livingston is a pianist. He's an American. He lives in Holland, and he is the world's foremost activist of George Antheil's music as a performer. And he's been performing Antheil's music since the 90s. And he and I met in 2000, actually on Antheil's 100th birthday, it turned out, just surely by coincidence. And Guy and I came up with the idea of doing another version of Ballet Mecanique for solo piano and what's called acousmonium. And acousmonium is a old term for a whole lot of loudspeakers. And we worked it out so that we could do the parts on 8 loudspeakers. And he was commissioned to perform it in Magdeburg, Germany, at a festival called Sinuston. And so I supplied him with the files. What we did is we sat down in a coffee shop in New Canaan, New York, and sat down with the score and went through it and said, okay, you're gonna play this, and the machines are gonna play this. And you're gonna play this, and the machines are gonna play this. And we worked out how to divvy up the score into the parts that he would play and the parts that would be pre-recorded, and pre-recorded as MIDI files to be played out of digital pianos, not player pianos. So there was one live performer totally surrounded by speakers. And at Sinuston they had 16 speakers. And let's see, what else did I want to say about this? Oh yeah, and we showed the movie at the same time. So the Ballet Mecanique movie is playing on the screen. Guy is sitting at the piano, and he's completely surrounded by speakers that are playing the player piano parts, the xylophones, the bells, the siren, the bass drums, and the tam-tam. Before he could do the premiere, however, something weird happened. In the building next door to the concert hall, where the performance was supposed to take place, they were doing some excavation, and they discovered an unexploded 100-pound bomb that had been dropped on Magdeburg in World War II by the Americans. And they evacuated the city so that they could dismantle the bomb, and they dismantled the bomb safely. Nobody was hurt. This sort of looks like a scene from 2001. Remember that scene? They postponed the concert, and they had it 2 days later, and then everything went okay. As we like to say, Antheil bombed in Germany. This is a little promotional video that they did for the festival.
When you're playing the piece, all you can think about is counting, and it's crazy. It's 7 plus 16 plus 14 plus 3 plus 10. You just have to keep in time, pay attention, and it's really man versus machine. And he was particularly into this question of the future of technology. And already in 1919, 1920, he was thinking about this, what would this piece sound like? And it took him a few years to be able to create it. He wanted to take player pianos, mechanical pianos which have rolls inside them, to connect 16 of them and to have them all working in synchrony. That didn't happen, it wasn't possible with the technology at the time. So what we're doing now is a recreation of what he probably imagined. First of all, as I'm playing the piano, and in addition to that, there are a set of loudspeakers behind and underneath the piano. And these loudspeakers are each projecting additional sounds so that I'm just one part of a sort of tapestry of sound. It's quite amazing because you hear all the different pieces coming through. You hear the electric bells, you hear the sirens, you hear the propellers, you hear the mechanical pianos, and then you hear the real piano in the center. And you also have the visual thing, you get to see that person playing. And it's the endless question of the 20th century, which is more important, the machine or the creativity, the machine or the art. And Antheil, I think, synthesizes these in this piece to make an incredible whole. Rossini opera where you're going to go humming the theme, da 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 da. But what you do take home from this is this incredible onslaught of the machinery and also this vision that people had at the time.
So I wasn't at this performance in Germany, but Guy and I did this together a couple of more times. We did it in Montreal, we did it in Providence, Rhode Island at Brown, and we did it here at Tufts. We had, in 2017, we had a little festival of film music by George Antheil. We showed some of his Hollywood films and some of the more experimental films, and then we showed the Ballet mecanique with Guy Livingston playing the piano and 8 JBL loudspeakers spread along the stage. All right. The Zurich Opera House, which is the home of the Ballet Zurich. And apparently the ballet makes more money there than the opera does, but they still call it an opera house. They contacted Guy and they said, we are doing a 100th anniversary of 3 pieces, and we want to do Ballet mecanique. We want to do a ballet to Ballet mecanique. And the other 2 pieces were George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue and Stravinsky's Les Noces. They got the original choreography, the Nijinsky choreography for Les Noces, and they hired a South African choreographer to do the Gershwin. And for Antheil, they brought in an Australian choreographer by the name of Merrill Tankard. And Merrill Tankard had her own agenda in terms of how she was going to approach the Ballet mecanique. And so she made the ballet about Hedy Lamarr. This was an interesting artistic decision. The Guy went to Zurich and rehearsed with them for about a month. And then they did, I think, a total of 9 performances. And I went to Zurich about 3 days before the first performance and was immediately drafted into service, although I was not supposed to be because they were having all sorts of technical problems. So I helped them with the technical problems, which really weren't all that bad, and saw the premiere of it. And these are a couple of videos that they did to promote the ballet. One was shot in rehearsals, and the other one was shot in the performance. What this had to do with ballet mecanique, I'm not sure. But Merrill Tankard apparently thought it was very important to celebrate Eddie Lamar. So that's what that was about. There was 15 years that separated the ballet mecanique's creation with Antheil's friendship with Eddie Lamar. That didn't seem to make a difference, if I can editorialize a little bit. Anyway, so that was a big success. The critics loved it. The audiences, it sold out all the performances, and was written up all over Zurich and all over Switzerland and Germany and Austria as a big event. What happens next? Every time I think that we've done everything that can be done with ballet mecanique, something else comes up. And that's been the story of what, a large part of what I've been doing for the last 25 years. And I don't know what's gonna happen next. Guy and I would love to do some more performances of the solo piano version. When we were contacted by the Ballet Zurich, I asked them if they had enough speakers and a big enough sound system, and they said, yeah, we just put in a new sound system that has 64 speakers. We said, okay, that should be enough. So it was coming from all over the hall. It was really quite wonderful from a musical standpoint. And the robots still exist. Eric Singer still has those robots in his warehouse in Brooklyn, and we've got to do 2 more installations of the robotic ballet mecanique. One was in Miami at a Museum of Industrial Design, and one was in New York City as part of a play that a woman had written about George Antheil and Eddie Lamar called Frequency Hopping, which was really very, very wonderful play, and she managed to get Yamaha to contribute 4 player pianos, which then hung from the ceiling of this theater. and a score was written for this installation by a composer in New York, and then we did a couple of performances at the Ballet Mecanique as well while we had the installation there. So that's it. What happens next? Maybe nothing, maybe something. But I get to talk about it, so thank you.
Yeah, so we have time for questions.
Absolutely, and then we have lunch.
Yeah, questions and lunch.
I've got
What could be better?
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So a couple. One, I guess they're both sort of musical questions about the tempo, because the tempo in the ballet is like super fast. It seems like the tempo keeps getting faster, and is there a tempo for the piece, or is that just dependent on the technology? That's one question. And then it seems like the piece is very resilient toward cuts and restructuring, but there is the original piece, right, that has a form of some sort, and there are 3 parts, right, 3 reels.
There are 3 roles, but they all go together.
They all go together. But is it that there's not, that the original form isn't necessarily
Cast and stop.
or part of the piece, or it's more haphazard than that? So
Yeah.
the tempo and the form.
Great
are
questions. The tempo that Antheil specifies is up in the air. We don't quite know what it is. He specified it in terms of inches per second of piano roll. But we don't know what that means. It's been calculated as being 144 beats per minute. There is no way that any machine or human being can play it at 144 beats per minute. When we did it in Lowell, we did it at 100. Then we made some adjustments and we slowed down parts of it, and so when we did it in other venues like the San Francisco Symphony, they did it at 120. The robotics and do it at 133, which is about as fast as the player pianist can handle it. Guy's version is at 117. The movie version that I did for the Unseen Cinema score was at 130. So, the tempo is fluid, and we've slowed down certain parts, which are ridiculously complicated, more complicated than the player pianist can handle. As far as the structure is concerned, it's pretty anarchic. And so it does lend itself to being chopped up. There are parts that just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And when I did the editing, I said, well, I don't need that to repeat 72 times. The piece is 1,140 bars long, and it has something like 600 tempo changes, or I should say meter changes. It repeats itself a lot. There are sections that start here that go there. There is no apparent overall structure. It's just a bunch of blocks that were put together. So the idea of taking out some of those blocks or shaving them down or making them smaller, no one has objected. And the people who know this piece, and there are scholars all over the world who have studied this piece, and Charles Emerkanian, the executor of the estate, thinks that all of these versions that we've done are wonderful. And he flew out from San Francisco to the Washington, D.C. installation and was ecstatic at what he heard. He said, my God, we're finally hearing Antheil's music the way he meant it. And, we cut it down by half.
And the silences really are, if you listen to the whole thing, the silences are really stunning, because there's been so much, and that's really long.
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah, there are 12 silences altogether. Each one gets longer. And then the last one is 64 beats. And it's pretty stunning. The audience really doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Yes?
Thank you so much, Paul. This is really wonderful. I have kind of pair of linked questions, specifically about the issue of human and machine engagement. And I'm curious, my first kind of question is about these performances that have no humans involved. For example, the museum version versus the one where we have so overtly the solo pianist. We have Guy Livingston, who's like a human engaging with these machines. And I'm wondering about reception and about the question of how you think these different performances navigate that tension between human and machine. And then my second part of this question is, do you see any relevancy with the moment we're in today, with AI, with a whole new debate around, machines replacing humans or threatening human creativity and interacting in these different ways?
Well, Antheil was 100 years ahead of his time, in exploring these questions. Seeing Guy perform this is astounding because first of all, he has to work really hard. He's wearing headphones because he's listening to a click track at the same time he's listening to the other instruments. What he says about this battle between the human and the machines is really what it's all about as far as his performance is concerned. And when it's done by a live ensemble, it's what it's all about too, because you've got the 16-player pianos, or however many we have, with the ensemble, and the conductor is wearing headphones, and the conductor's trying to keep everything together. And when we did a performance in San Francisco, and Michael Tilson Thomas was conducting, and in the middle of the performance, his headphones flew off. And the assistant came and, pick up the headphones and put them back on his head. And he didn't miss a beat, which is because he's Michael Tilson Thomas. It's very relevant. It's definitely a question that we are looking at now. And as we look into AI assisted composition or AI accomplished composition, it's where do the human beings fit in all this? And what's to me what's marvelous about this project is that these were questions which were being asked by some people 100 years ago.
If watching the museum the robotic footage today made me think about, this is on the subject of tempo, but also this battle of machine and person that you're talking about. So 144 is pretty much impossible even for the machines.
Mm-hmm.
So watching those pianos made me also think, how much repetition is there, not just narratively, but vertically? Okay, you've got 16-player pianos doing very similar things, right? They're kind of one wash.
There are actually only
So
4 parts.
If you right, but they're doubled.
Right.
They're 4 at a time.
Right.
There's also a version that I played in the 1980s, which is just 4 pianos and 8 percussionists, which I don't even know when that was made.
1952.
Oh, well, so I did the 1952 version, which was hard enough, and then your version in its first iteration premiere was, and you said that was the slowest tempo, right?
Yeah.
100.
Yeah.
We were pretty pokey. So I don't think you could hear what we heard in the museum robotic version if it were any faster. I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then also hearing the detail of how did the 4 parts interact?
Yeah.
And why 16? Just multiples of 4?
Just multiples of 4.
To make it louder?
To make it louder. He writes that there are no dynamics in the piece. He writes this. And there are no dynamics in the piece. It's to be played as loud as possible. And the dynamics are dependent on how many pianos are playing at any one time. So sometimes all 16 are playing the same thing. Sometimes 8 of them cut out. Sometimes 12 of them cut out. And this is how he controls dynamics in the piece. At 144, I've done a MIDI version of it at 144, and it just screams by, and you can't hear any of the detail, and you can't hear any of the themes. It's just this overwhelming wash of noise, which, maybe that's what he was going for, but, it's just not achievable.
Yeah, well, the ballet recordings, which were so finely tuned, and I can't tell what's machine and what's guy, but I think what we were hearing was mostly machine, the very high sparkling stuff.
The
Yeah,
that's Guy.
That's Guy.
And then it segues into the machine.
It was super sharp. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and in 1999 at Lowell, we were not that sharp.
No.
No way. And there were so many more of us too.
Right.
So it feels like you get to experiment with how to bring out the details.
Yeah.
And you know, it's
Yeah.
almost like post-production and a recording, but on a grand scale.
On a grand scale, we're recomposing it. Yeah, yeah, we're not just posting it, we're recomposing it and listening to it. And, you know, people who hear it have totally different reactions to it. We did it at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and some audience members who were at a dress rehearsal who heard it twice said, "You've got to play it twice, because you can hear it so much better the second time." And we did that. We came out after the first performance, so we said, "Who wants to hear it again?" And like 2/3 of the audience stayed and listened to it a second time. And they really appreciated it. They said, "Boy, we heard stuff that we just didn't hear the first time." Yeah. Frank?
Are there a lot of more recent musicians, composers that take inspiration from this piece, or styles that take inspiration from ballet, or is it really more of a one-off in music history?
Well, you know, you could look at Steve Reich in terms of repetition and small variation. You could look at Philip Glass and saying, okay, we're going to repeat the same thing over and over again with tiny little changes. And Antheil did a lot of that. I mean, putting the piece together in the MIDI file was really tough in some ways, because very often he would take a bar and he'd repeat it, but he'd leave out an eighth note. And you try to copy and paste that, and it doesn't work. You know, you got to do it. You know, so there's a lot of extra work there. I think in some ways, as maximalist as this piece is, it has inspired the minimalists, because it's you know, we don't have any harmony, we don't have any through melody, we don't have any apparent structure. It's just sort of there. So I think that, you know, not to mention the fact that Cage, you know, was inspired by the metallic stuff and the silences, and you know, you can see that in Cage's work, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's because there are these like heavy metal bands that do really elaborate, like they'll create the music in MIDI and then learn it from the MIDI, because it's too hard to play, unfortunately.
Right.
But it's interesting that they're like in the noise music scene, a lot of people go back to the Italian futurists, where there's almost nothing known of the music, but they can sort of imagine it. But I don't see a lot of like, you would think like drum and bass or really complicated electronic dance music would go back to this, but I haven't seen people cite it the same way that they do like the Italian futurists.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I would think that maybe also somehow there's inspiration for the free jazz piano players like Richard Abrams and Richard, I always get his name twisted around, or Cecil Taylor, because of texture. But I don't know if there's any written stuff about.
I haven't seen anything
influence.
about that. I mean, you're right. There is a certain, you know, vein
Yeah.
that sort of flows through that.
Maybe it was the time.
Yeah. Jimmy.
John Adams Harmonium is another one that we just did last year. John Adams Harmonium, same thing, 25 straight minutes of just driving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we did Les Noces. John played Les Noces. That was a long time ago. Remember we did Les Noces?
Yeah, Les Noces has some similarities to this piece.
Oh, if you look at the score of Les Noces and the score of Ballet
They're almost
Mecanique,
they look
they
identical.
look identical.
Yeah, my teacher used to call it strata. She called it Just the way it looks on the page, you
Yeah.
can call it strata, but yeah, and I was looking up just here if Lighthouse has ever been electrified, like if they've ever recorded,
I think,
it has apparently,
Yeah.
you know, where they've done Lighthouse with computers.
and Stravinsky was really interested in player pianos and did
Yeah.
a bunch
Right,
of pieces.
right.
Like a
Stravinsky's
version
earlier
for an old
version.
pianola or something, yeah, I didn't know that, but that's
Yeah.
really,
Yeah, Stravinsky did like 4 versions of Les Notes.
That's
and
right,
He
yeah.
threw out the first 3, but they do survive.
very
And he
small.
was actually the one who came up with the idea of multiple player pianos in a piece. That he had thought about this, and Antheil was an acolyte, one might say a sycophant of Stravinsky's. And Antheil stole the idea from Stravinsky. Stravinsky dismissed it. Stravinsky realized it wasn't possible. They were both working with Pleyel, the piano manufacturer, and Stravinsky had a studio at Pleyel's factory. And he, entertained this idea of multiple player pianos, and then he realized it wasn't going to work. And Antheil said, "Oh, I can make it work," and he went ahead and did it. And then Antheil accused Stravinsky of stealing the idea from him. After which Stravinsky never spoke to Antheil again for like 30 years. They became bitter enemies. What can you do? Yeah.
Stravinsky and ragtime, and I hear ragtime
Oh,
and
yeah.
ragtime.
Oh yeah.
Except that they're not following Joplin's instructions.
No.
It's never right to play ragtime fast.
That's right. That's right.
As his music went on, like after composing this, did he keep aspects of what he was doing here, or?
No, he went neoclassical.
Huh.
He wrote very well structured, understandable, often tonal music, and which is one of the reasons he was accepted well in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He wrote an opera, which is sounds very much like Gershwin and Copland, called Transatlantic, which is about. This is interesting. It's about a presidential election that gets stolen by the mob.
Preposterous.
Preposterous. 1929, I think, was when he wrote that, and it had one performance in Munich, and then was banned by the Nazis. It's been done here once by a small company in Minnesota, but it's never been done. I've heard little bits of it, and I think it's fascinating. It'd be wonderful to see somebody produce it.
And did he leave notes or commentary about his thoughts about either the shift in his style or what he was trying to do with this piece and compared to his other work?
No, he wrote a lot about this piece. He wrote a lot about pieces he wrote mostly for piano, for solo piano. And he wrote a lot about his philosophy. I mean, he thought of himself as a futurist. He considered himself a futurist, although he was about 10 years out of date. And he wrote voluminous articles for various journals about ballet mecanique and what he was trying to accomplish. And then when it all fell apart, he didn't write about it at all. Didn't write about his transition, just went on composing. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And, let's see.